The first words out of my Pixar mentor's mouth was, I don't know how much time you had. What? Why is he worried about how much time I had? I worked on this every day straight for a week. Then my mentor followed up with a couple haymakers. Hey, that tail could use some work. That character could also use some work. He looks like a scorpion here with his tail like this. Oh god, he thinks this sucks. And that's when he really let loose, firing note after note effortlessly. Fix this, change that, get rid of this, what are you doing with that over here? The praise that I had dreamt of never came. I got none of that. In 5 minutes, I was floored. My ego was crushed into pieces. How could I have been so blind? How could I have been so arrogant? How could I have dared to send this to a Pixar animator thinking it was good? As a valedictorian, I thought I had already mastered the basics, but apparently I knew nothing. You see, it's easy to overlook basics and think you have them down really well when you really don't, right? It's easy to miss the things that you don't know. And that sets you up to fail later when you're trying to create demo reel shots, right? Like awesome dialogue pieces. I mean, how are you going to make a character act if you can't get a ball to move around in a very convincing way? How are you going to have fluid spine and arm overlap on a character if you can't animate a pendulum or a squirrel tail really, really well? The basics have to be strong first, or everything that comes after, like demo reel acting shots, will be almost impossible. So to my everlasting shame, let me walk you through my mentor's feedback and try to open your eyes to some of what the pros see that may be getting overlooked. Number 1, tail overlap. I thought the tail had fluid flowing drag, but turns out the tail in my squirrel animation wasn't fluid at all in any section. The beginning look, the jump, the landing, the cuddling at the end, it was all off. I couldn't see how much better it could look until it was shown to me. It didn't click that the base of the tail should, drive the action for the rest of the tail. That I should track the tip of the tail to see my arcs, or to even consider things like a tail slapping down on the ground to lead into a jump. Number 2, pivot points. The acorn falling was such a simple thing, right? How could that be messed up? Well, I didn't pivot the swinging from the stem point, like where the stem is attached to the branch. So when it rotated, it looked like it was just floating on the branch. It wasn't really attached correctly to where it felt like there was gravity there affecting it. And so this was one of those things that was easily overlooked, easily not thought about because, we don't have to think about those things in everyday life. And it could easily have been fixed. Stronger spacing. All over the animation, there was plenty of room to push the spacing, meaning to push the speed of movements in a more interesting and powerful way. Something more natural with gravity considered, or momentum. A lot of movements in my animation here come off floaty, just like the acorn we were talking about. When it falls, it actually feels so light that it could be a feather or, an acorn that's on the moon. There's very little feeling of gravity at all. And, I could have just fixed that very quickly by pushing the spacing to favor more weight there. Strong spacing would have also come in handy for when the squirrel is preparing to jump and it's doing its reactions, to its different emotional takes. I could shoot down into the squash a lot snappier, holding very tightly in the squash, going faster through the middle of that movement, spending essentially more frames in the squash pose to actually see the squash and therefore feel the energy build up in the anticipation or in the reactive takes that the character has to live in that key pose or that moment, that emotional moment for that character, right? And that's without even going into talking about how better spacing would have made the tail better, right? Having the tail favor, the top of the arc for more weight with the tip of the tail. Number 4, staging the camera. The actions where I swing the tail behind the ball of the character itself, I just kind of swing it across, are hard to read. Why is that the case? Because the camera is angled to really not show that movement well. It's blocked by the ball, it's blocked by the acorn and other things. And this matters because it makes it harder for the viewer to watch the story and figure out what's happening. So to compensate, I could have had more tail up and down movement as it swung right to left, right? It could go up and down as it swings in some kind of nice arc, and that way we can track what's happening even though it's a bit obscured. That would keep the story clear throughout the entire animation. After all, if your audience can't see what's happening, they can't be entertained, right? So the more clear your animation is staged, the easier they're going to be entertained, essentially. And that's how important staging is and how easily it's overlooked, even in something as simple as this squirrel animation. And this goes hand in hand with 5 appealing poses. If you don't have poses that are appealing, chances are the emotion or the character doesn't read that well. On a first glance, a viewer is looking at a pose and they're not quite picking up the same feeling from it that you want them to have. And if you combine this with staging issues, it's really going to kill the entertainment because they can't see the story that you're telling. Most of the default poses that I had with my squirrel tail here are unappealing. My mentor even said, hey, it looked like a scorpion in several places, like here. The tail should look fluffy, fun, with, like a nice curve. And squirrels kind of almost have that like very happy, energetic look. They move very fast. S shapes into the squirrel. Even if you look at squirrels, you'll see that in their tail. The S shapes usually give us that fun, fluffy feeling. Something that is more appealing, less aggressive than what I posed out here for some of the scorpion poses. I don't know how I got there. I guess I was trying to keep the shapes so simple, and I didn't really understand what I was doing. These S shapes, if they're consistently nice, it gives the character a certain look throughout the animation. If you're always trying to get into that ending S shape, that's always where you're going. It makes it very clear that this is a squirrel, that it has a certain attitude, and it gives you a nice contrast in obvious moments where things get cartoonily exaggerated, like here where I have the tail snap into a very straight, stiff tail because he's shocked. Number 6, better character. There's moving your character around believably, then there's moving your character around with emotional reactions that are believable, aka acting. My mentor pointed this out right away, that it looks strange right in the beginning when he's just sitting there and he suddenly looks up at the acorn. It feels forced for him to suddenly notice the acorn there after he was just staring off into oblivion, right? It's like, how did his attention go up there? To make it more natural, an easy fix would have been to have him just jump in first. He's like finishing his jump, lands, and then he's like, whoa, there's an acorn here, I just arrived. That would have made a lot more sense. And then when it comes to the jump and then the turnaround here, it's strange that the character, the squirrel lands and he kind of hangs out here for a minute, very still looking this direction. We would assume that, since he was after this acorn, this was his prize and he hit it, he wants to find out whether it fell or not. And maybe he already assumed that it did fall, so it would make more sense for him to just spin around already. So like for this landing, as he's landing, I could already be like in the middle of a spin to get him over to this position faster, saving me time in the animation, leading to more entertainment because they're moving the story along and having the character make a lot more sense. And the other thing that could have been nice here, just for personality's sake, is having the big jump, and then maybe it's like boom, boom, and he's got that excitement where he's got the momentum of his jump finishing, but he's kind of giddy, so it makes sense for that momentum and the giddiness for him to boop boop have that kind of little playful little bounce after he lands. And during that, I could do the spinning to kind of get him spun around a little slower, so it could happen over a couple of jumps. And then he'd be further back and has to giddy over here towards the acorn, which could open up some more character opportunities. Even though this is just a simple squirrel, right? Thankfully, I wasn't doing a full-on dialogue piece when I did this, because it allowed me to make changes quickly and learn from them. All of these notes that my mentor gave me would have enhanced the squirrel's personality, the believability that this squirrel is alive, and ultimately created a much more entertaining story. Something closer to Scrat like I had assumed I was getting, but had not even come close to. And, you know, of course, when I heard this feedback, it wasn't all sunshine, rainbows, and fluffy unicorns. It was a shocking kick to the teeth. It didn't feel good, beat me up for a while, but this was exactly what I needed to hear. It opened my eyes to how off my skills were with the basics still, even though I was a valedictorian with a bachelor's degree. And this also hinted to me that I had a long way to go before I could get paid to animate, especially at some studio like Pixar, where they have a very, very high quality to reach. So from this point forward, I started taking my dream career as an animator much more seriously, trying to meet that much higher bar, that higher level that I didn't see. And that paid off a year later when I got my first job. And it all started right here with a very basic, simple animation that is usually overlooked. My hope is that my story here helps you start seeing a higher level of animation skill that you need to reach to get a job as an animator. If it did, share with me in the comments below what was the most eye-opening thing for you. Maybe it was how shocking, the difference in fluidity there was in the overlap of the tail, how my example could have been so much better in terms of overlap, or how changing certain movements would make the character's reactions more natural, or something else altogether, even from the notes that was just eye-opening. Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to chat with you about it, and I'll talk to you guys soon there. Until next time, happy animating.